23 years, he hadn't touched a patient. Then a girl knocked on his door and said, "My mom's dying," and the real doctor left town. So he picked up the bag he swore he'd never open again and walked straight into hell. The coffee went cold every morning at exactly 6:47 a.m. Dr. Samuel Brennan knew this because he'd been timing it for 23 years. Black coffee in his grandfather's Navy mug, steam rising like prayers he'd stopped saying. The same routine, the same porch, the same crushing weight of what used to be. Millbrook, West Virginia hadn't changed much since 2001. Population still hovering around 3,200. Still 2 churches on Main Street, Baptist and Methodist, facing each other like old arguments. Still the same mountains wrapped around the valley like God's own hands, holding secrets and coal dust, and the dreams of people who stayed when everyone else left. What had changed was Samuel. 23 years ago, he'd been the town's golden boy, Harvard Medical School graduate who came home instead of chasing money in Charlotte or Atlanta. The kind of doctor who knew your middle name and your mother's maiden name and exactly how you liked your stitches. Tight enough to heal, loose enough to breathe. Now he was the ghost on Elm Street. The man who'd lost his wife and his calling in the same terrible winter. Who'd locked his medical bag in Martha's hope chest and thrown away the key to his own heart. Morning, Dr. Brennan. The voice belonged to Emma Walsh, 16 and stubborn as mountain granite. Daughter of Mike Walsh, who ran the Texaco, and granddaughter of Earl Walsh, who died in Samuel's hands during the mine collapse of '98. She walked past his house every morning on her way to school, always with that same greeting, always with that same hopeful smile. Samuel never answered. Hadn't spoken to anyone in town except the grocery clerk and the mailman for over 2 decades. But Emma kept trying. Some kids give up on lost causes. Others are raised by people who taught them that lost causes are exactly where miracles hide. This morning was different, though. Emma had stopped walking. "Dr. Brennan," she said again. But this time her voice carried something that made Samuel look up from his cold coffee. "I need to ask you something important." Fear. That's what he heard. Raw, 16-year-old fear wrapped around words she didn't want to say. He almost went inside. Almost pretended he hadn't heard. Almost kept being the man who'd perfected the art of not caring. Instead, he found himself walking to the porch railing. First time he'd moved from that chair during morning coffee in 23 years. "What is it, Emma?" The words came out rusty, like an old gate finally opening. She held up a piece of paper. Her hands were shaking. "It's about my mom, the new doctor, Dr. Park, and she left yesterday. Packed up and drove to Charleston without telling anyone. And Mom's been having these chest pains and..." Emma's voice cracked. "She won't go to the hospital in Harrison. Says we can't afford it, says it's probably nothing. But I remember what Grandpa looked like before he died. And she looks..." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Samuel had seen that look before. The gray pallor, the shortness of breath, the way someone starts putting their affairs in order without telling anyone why. When did the chest pains start? The doctor in him was waking up, stretching muscles that hadn't been used in decades, 3 weeks ago. But they're getting worse. Yesterday she couldn't make it up the stairs without stopping. Emma stepped closer to the porch. "I know. You don't practice anymore. I know what everyone says about why you stopped. But my mom, she always defended you. Even when people called you bitter. Even when they said you'd given up." Samuel's chest tightened. Sarah Walsh. He remembered her as a young mother, bringing Emma in for vaccinations and well-child visits. Always worried she wasn't doing enough. Always grateful for reassurance that she was raising her daughter just fine. What does she say about the pain? Sharp. Like someone squeezing her heart with a fist. Gets worse when she's stressed or scared. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She's been working double shifts at the diner since Dad's hours got cut at the mine. I think she's killing herself to keep us afloat. Samuel knew the type. Mountain women, who'd rather die than burden anyone, who carried the weight of the world on their shoulders and called it character. "I can't help you, Emma." The words tasted like ashes. I'm not a doctor anymore." "Yes, you are." She said it with such conviction that Samuel actually stepped backward. "You can take away a license, but you can't take away a calling. My grandpa told me that before he died. Said some men are born to heal, and death can't change that." The soldier girl had her grandfather's eyes. Earl Walsh had been a good man, a coal miner who'd never missed church, never missed a chance to help a neighbor, never missed an opportunity to remind his granddaughter that kindness was a choice you made every single day. "Your grandfather died because I made a mistake," Samuel said. The confession came out like a physical blow. My hands shook. I second-guessed myself. I let fear make my decisions instead of training. "No." Emma's voice was steady now, strong. "Grandpa died because a mine shaft collapsed and crushed his chest. You kept him alive long enough for him to tell us he loved us. Long enough for him to meet me for the first time." She was right, but Samuel had spent 23 years making her wrong in his mind, rewriting history until he was the villain of every story. "I haven't practiced medicine since Martha died," he said. "Then maybe it's time to start living again." The simplicity of it hit him like a sledgehammer. For 23 years he'd been confusing survival with living, breathing with existing, safety with cowardice. "Where is your mother now?" "At work. The Morning Glory Diner. She's there until 3. Samuel looked at his watch. 15 a.m. Plenty of time to make a decision that would change everything, or plenty of time to retreat back into the safety of his self-imposed exile. He thought about Martha. What she would say if she were sitting in her rocking chair beside him, watching this conversation unfold. She'd always been his compass when the world got confusing, the voice of conscience when his own got too quiet. "Some things are more important than being safe, Sam. Some things are worth the risk of your heart breaking all over again." "Emma," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. "Go to school. After 3 o'clock, bring your mother to my house. Tell her it's just a conversation between old friends." Emma's face lit up like sunrise over the mountains. "Thank you, Dr. Brennan." "Thank you so—" "Don't thank me yet," Samuel interrupted. "I might not be able to help her. It's been a long time. Since I've been anything other than a bitter old man on a porch." "You were never just that," Emma said. "You just forgot who you really were." She walked away then, practically bouncing on her toes, left Samuel standing on his porch holding a cold cup of coffee and feeling something he hadn't felt in 23 years. Purpose. The feeling terrified him, because purpose meant caring, and caring meant the possibility of losing someone again, of making another mistake, of having blood on his hands and failure in his heart. But as he watched Emma disappear around the corner, heading off to school with hope in her step, Samuel realized something that stopped him cold. He was already caring. Had been caring for 23 years, in fact. Caring so much that it had nearly killed him. The problem wasn't that he'd stopped loving people. The problem was that he'd loved them so much he'd been afraid to try saving them. Fear had been running his life for more than 2 decades. Fear of failure. Fear of loss. Fear of not being good enough when it mattered most. Maybe it was time to let love run his life instead. Samuel walked back into his house, Martha's house, their house, and headed straight for the bedroom closet. Behind her wedding dress and his old suits, behind boxes of photographs and Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight since 2001, sat a cedar hope chest. His hands shook as he lifted the lid. There it was. His medical bag. Black leather worn, smooth by years of house calls and emergencies. The brass clasps still shined, still clicked with the same satisfying sound he remembered. Inside, stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, otoscope, reflex hammer. The tools of his trade, waiting patiently like faithful dogs. He picked up the stethoscope, Littman Cardiology III. Martha had given it to him for his 30th birthday, had it engraved with his initials and the words, "For Healing Hearts." She'd meant it literally then. Now he wondered if she'd meant something deeper. Samuel closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done in 23 years. He prayed, not for guidance or strength or courage, though he needed all three. He prayed for forgiveness, for the wisdom to know the difference between his will and God's will, for the humility to accept that he might fail, and the faith to try anyway. When he opened his eyes, the sun was streaming through the bedroom windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny angels. For the first time in 23 years, Dr. Samuel Brennan was ready to be a doctor again, whether or not he remembered how. The hours between morning coffee and 3 o'clock stretched like an eternity. Samuel spent them doing what he should have done 23 years ago, preparing. He dusted off medical textbooks, reviewed cardiac symptoms, checked expiration dates on medications he'd hoarded like a dragon hoarding gold. Most of it was still good. Aspirin doesn't expire. Neither does the knowledge carved into your bones by years of training and practice. At 2:45, he positioned himself by the front window, watching for Emma and her mother. His hands weren't shaking anymore. His mind was clear. For the first time, since Martha's funeral, he felt like the man he'd been trained to be, a healer. At exactly 3:07 p.m., Emma appeared at the end of Elm Street, walking slowly beside a woman who moved like every step hurt. Sarah Walsh looked older than her 42 years, gray streaks in brown hair that used to shine, shoulders bent under the weight of single motherhood and economic uncertainty. But when she smiled at something Emma said, Samuel could see the beautiful young mother she'd been. He opened the door before they knocked. "Hello, Sarah," he said. "Thank you for coming." Her face registered surprise, then something that might have been relief. "Dr. Brennan, Emma said you wanted to talk." "I did. About old times, about how you're feeling these days." He stepped aside to let them in. "Coffee?" The next 2 hours would determine whether Dr. Samuel Brennan still had the skills to save a life, or whether 23 years of silence had cost him everything that had ever mattered. Sarah Walsh's heart was trying to kill her. Samuel knew it within 10 minutes of listening to her chest. Irregular rhythm, slight murmur, blood pressure that painted a picture no one wanted to see. 180 over 110. Sustained stress, overwork, and genetics conspiring toward a widowmaker. "When did you last see a cardiologist?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral while his mind raced through differential diagnoses. "Never." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Can barely afford the copay at the urgent care clinic. Cardiologist might as well be on the moon." Emma sat beside her mother on Martha's old sofa, holding her hand like she could transfer strength through skin contact. The girl had her grandfather's intuition. She knew this conversation was heading somewhere her mother wouldn't want to go. "Sarah, I need to be direct with you." Samuel set down his stethoscope and looked her in the eyes. "Your heart is in trouble, significant trouble. Without proper treatment, you're looking at a major cardiac event within months, maybe weeks." The color drained from Sarah's face. "You mean a heart attack?" "I mean death," Samuel said. No sugarcoating, no gentle euphemisms, just the truth delivered with the kind of clarity that might shock someone into taking action. "Emma will be planning your funeral before her 18th birthday unless we do something about this right now." Emma's sharp intake of breath cut through the room like a blade. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her chest, pressing against the pain that had become her constant companion. "How much?" Sarah asked. "Direct, mountain practical. No time to waste on self-pity when survival was on the line. Cardiac catheterization alone runs about $15,000. If you need stents, add another $10,000 to $20,000. Bypass surgery, if it comes to that, could hit 6 figures. Samuel had delivered this speech before, back when he practiced. Watched good people make impossible choices between financial ruin and early death. "Then I guess that settles it." Sarah stood up, smoothing down her diner uniform. "Emma, we should head home. Got dinner to start. Sit down." Samuel's command voice, the one he'd used in emergencies when people needed to listen or die. "We're not finished." Something in his tone made Sarah pause. Emma's eyes went wide. "I said sit down," Samuel repeated, gentler this time. "Because I haven't told you about option number 3. Sarah sank back onto the sofa. "What option?" "Me." The word hung in the air like a dare. I can't do cardiac catheterization in my living room, Samuel continued. But I can manage your condition, monitor your heart rhythm, adjust medications, work with you on lifestyle modifications. Keep you alive long enough to figure out a long-term solution. You said you weren't a doctor anymore, Emma whispered. I lied. Samuel's smile held 23 years of regret. You can take away a license, but you can't take away what God puts in your hands. Your grandfather was right about that. Sarah was shaking her head before he finished speaking. Dr. Brennan, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but nothing. Samuel's voice carried authority he'd forgotten he possessed. Emma's right. You're killing yourself to provide for her. Working 16-hour days, eating nothing but diner food, living on 3 hours of sleep and pure stubbornness. That stops now. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes intense. You think you're being noble, sacrificing your health for your daughter's future. But what kind of future are you really giving her if she has to bury her mother at 16? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma's face crumpled, tears starting to flow. I'm doing the best I can, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I know you are, and your best has been extraordinary. Emma's proof of that. She's growing into exactly the kind of young woman her grandfather would be proud of. Strong, compassionate, brave enough to knock on the door of a hermit when her mother needs help. Samuel stood up, paced to the window, where he'd spent so many mornings avoiding the world. But sometimes our best isn't enough. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need to let other people carry part of the load. I can't afford to pay you. Did I ask for money? The simplicity of the question stopped Sarah cold. Then why? She asked. Why would you help us? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains that had held this community for generations. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. Because 23 years ago, I made a promise to use my skills to help people. Because your father died trusting me to do everything I could. Because Emma reminds me that some things are more important than being afraid. He turned back to face them. And because Martha would never forgive me if I let you die of pride when I had the power to help. Sarah's tears came then. Not the pretty crying of movies, but the deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a woman who'd been carrying the world alone for too long. Emma wrapped her arms around her mother, and Samuel felt something crack open in his chest. The ice that had formed around his heart was finally starting to thaw. What would I need to do? Sarah asked when she could speak again. Trust me, Samuel said. Take the medications I prescribe. Follow the dietary changes I recommend. Let me monitor your heart function twice a week. And most importantly, cut back your hours at the diner. I can't cut back. We need the money. Sarah. Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. How much money will Emma need if you're dead? The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I'll talk to Frank about reducing your shifts, Samuel continued. Good chance he'll understand. His own father died of a heart attack at 45. Sometimes people need reminding that money isn't worth a damn if there's no one left to spend it on. Over the next hour, they worked out the details. Medication schedule, dietary restrictions, exercise limitations, follow-up appointments in Samuel's living room, which would become an impromptu clinic. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't conventional. But it was a chance. As Sarah and Emma prepared to leave, Emma turned back at the door. Dr. Brennan, she said, thank you for remembering who you are. Thank you for not letting me forget, Samuel replied. After they left, Samuel sat in Martha's rocking chair and allowed himself to feel something he'd buried for 23 years. Hope. He was back in the business of saving lives, starting with Sarah Walsh, but maybe, just maybe, including his own. The trouble started 3 days later at 3:47 a.m. Samuel woke to pounding on his front door and shouting that cut through the mountain silence like a chainsaw through prayer. Dr. Brennan, please, you gotta help us. He stumbled from bed, grabbed a robe, and opened the door to chaos. Mike Walsh stood on his porch. wild-eyed and shaking, supporting his wife who was doubled over in pain. Emma hovered behind them, still in her pajamas, clutching a cell phone. "It's her heart," Mike gasped. "Started about an hour ago. Chest pain so bad she can't stand up. Can't breathe right." Emma wanted to call 911, but the ambulance is tied up with that accident on Route 9, Emma finished. "Drunk driver hit a family of 4. They said it could be 2 hours before they get here." Samuel looked at Sarah. Even in the porch light, he could see the gray pallor, the way she was favoring her left arm, the sweat beading on her forehead. Despite the cool mountain air, classic heart attack symptoms, the kind that killed people while they waited for help that might never come. "Bring her inside," Samuel said, his training kicking in. "Put her on the sofa." Emma grabbed my medical bag from the bedroom closet. As Mike helped Sarah to the couch, Samuel's mind was already working through protocols. Aspirin first, check vitals, assess pain level, determine if this was angina or the real thing. But even as he moved with practiced efficiency, a voice in the back of his head whispered the words that had haunted him for 23 years. "What if you're wrong? What if you make another mistake? What if she dies because you're not good enough?" He pushed the voice away. Sarah Walsh didn't have time for his self-doubt. Emma appeared with his medical bag, hands shaking but eyes focused. "What can I do?" "Hold the flashlight steady while I examine her." Samuel knelt beside the sofa, began checking Sarah's pulse. "Sarah, can you describe the pain for me? Like someone sitting on my chest," she gasped. "Can't get a full breath. Pain's going down my left arm now." Samuel's blood went cold. Textbook myocardial infarction. Heart attack in progress. He checked her blood pressure, 90/60, dropping fast. Checked her pulse, irregular, thready, weak. This wasn't angina, this was the big one. The widowmaker Sarah's genetics and lifestyle had been building toward for years. "Mike," Samuel said, keeping his voice calm. "Call 911 again. Tell them we have a STEMI in progress. That's doctor talk for major heart attack. Tell them if they don't get here in the next 30 minutes, they'll be picking up a body." Mike's face went white, but he grabbed the phone. Samuel turned back to Sarah, whose breathing was becoming more labored by the minute. She was going into cardiogenic shock. Her heart wasn't pumping enough blood to keep her organs functioning. He had 2 choices: watch her die while waiting for an ambulance that might not arrive in time, or do something he hadn't done in 23 years. Practice emergency medicine without a hospital, without backup, without any safety net except his own hands and whatever grace God might provide. "Sarah," he said, taking her hand. "Look at me. I need you to stay with me, okay? Keep talking to me." "Dr. Brennan," she whispered. "I'm scared." "I know, but you're not alone. I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere." He opened his medical bag and pulled out a vial of nitroglycerin he'd been saving for 23 years. Checked the expiration date. Still good. "This might help with the chest pain," he told her, placing a tablet under her tongue. "Let it dissolve." Emma knelt beside him. "Is she going to be okay?" Samuel looked into the girl's eyes, Earl Walsh's eyes, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was going to tell the truth. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure she is." Over. The next 20 minutes, Samuel fought for Sarah Walsh's life with weapons he'd almost forgotten how to use. Nitroglycerin for the chest pain, morphine for the agony, careful monitoring of her blood pressure and heart rhythm. But mostly he fought with something more powerful than medication: presence. The simple act of being there, of not giving up, of holding steady while the world fell apart. At 4:23 a.m., the ambulance finally arrived. Sarah was still alive, still breathing, still fighting. "What have we got?" asked the lead paramedic, a young man who looked like he'd seen too much for his age. 52-year-old female, STEMI in progress, Samuel rattled off. Onset approximately 2 hours ago. Given sublingual nitro, 4 milligrams morphine for pain control. BP holding steady at 95/65, pulse irregular but strong. The paramedics' eyebrows shot up. "You a doctor?" "Used to be," Samuel said. "Well, you probably just saved her life." Another hour, and he didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. As they loaded Sarah onto the stretcher, she grabbed Samuel's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank me when you're dancing at Emma's wedding," Samuel replied. The ambulance disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, red lights flashing against the mountains like prayer flags. Mike and Emma stood in Samuel's living room, both of them shaking from adrenaline and fear. "Will she be okay?" Emma asked. "She's got a fighting chance now," Samuel said. "Your mother's stronger than she looks, always has been." "Dr. Brennan," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when she comes home." But as he cleaned up his medical supplies and tried to process what had just happened, Samuel realized something that shook him to his core. For the first time in 23 years, he'd practiced medicine under pressure, made life or death decisions, put someone else's life in his hands. And he hadn't failed. Sarah Walsh was alive because he'd been there, because he'd remembered who he was supposed to be, because he'd chosen courage over fear. The realization hit him like lightning. He was still a doctor, had always been a doctor. 23 years of exile hadn't changed what God had put in his hands. But as the adrenaline faded and dawn broke over the mountains, Samuel also realized something else. Word was going to spread. In a town like Millbrook, secrets lasted about as long as morning dew. By noon, everyone would know that the hermit on Elm Street had come back from the dead, that Dr. Samuel Brennan was practicing medicine again, and that was going to create problems he wasn't prepared to handle. The explosion came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, exactly 1 week after Samuel had saved Sarah Walsh's life. He woke to windows rattling and the sound of the earth screaming. The Millbrook Natural Gas Processing Plant, 3 miles east of the town, tucked between the mountains like a sleeping giant, had just become a war zone. Samuel was on his porch in 30 seconds, watching orange flames paint the night sky like the devil's own sunrise. The smell hit him next, sulfur, burning chemicals, and something else that made his stomach turn. Fear. The smell of a community about to be tested beyond its limits. His phone rang. Emma's number. "Dr. Brennan?" Her voice was steady, but he could hear chaos in the background. "There's been an explosion at the gas plant. Multiple casualties. The emergency dispatcher said all ambulances are tied up with a multi-car accident near Charleston. Won't be available for at least 2 hours." Samuel's blood went cold. "How many injured?" "They don't know yet, but Dr. Brennan..." Emma's voice cracked. "My mom was there. She picked up extra security shifts to help with medical bills. She was supposed to get off at midnight, but the line went dead." Samuel stood on his porch for exactly 3 seconds, watching hell bloom on the horizon. Then he moved faster than he had in 23 years. Medical bag. Emergency supplies. The battery-powered radio Martha had insisted they keep for emergencies, all thrown into his old Ford pickup that hadn't been started since Bush was president. The truck coughed to life on the 3rd try, like it had been waiting 2 decades for this moment. Samuel drove toward the flames. The scene at the gas plant looked like something from a war movie. Emergency lights strobed against billowing smoke. Workers staggered around in torn uniforms, some helping others, some just standing in shock. The main processing building was a twisted skeleton of metal and fire. Samuel parked as close as he dared and grabbed his medical bag. A security guard with blood streaming down his face stumbled toward him. "Sir, you can't be here. Too dangerous." "I'm a doctor," Samuel said. The words came out with authority he'd forgotten he possessed. "Where are the injured?" "Over there." The guard pointed toward a makeshift triage area someone had set up in the parking lot. "But we ain't supposed to let anyone..." "Son," Samuel interrupted, "unless you want to explain to these people's families why you kept medical help away, you'll get out of my way." The guard stepped aside. The triage area was chaos wrapped in emergency. Blankets. 23 injured workers, ranging from minor cuts to trauma that would require immediate surgery. And standing in the middle of it all, directing care like a battlefield general, was Emma Walsh. She saw Samuel approaching and her face flooded with relief. "Thank God you're here," she said. I've been doing basic first aid, but some of these people—" She gestured toward a man lying unconscious with what looked like serious head trauma. "I don't know what to do." "You're doing fine," Samuel said, surveying the scene with eyes that had been trained for exactly this kind of disaster. "Tell me what we've got." Emma rattled off the casualties like she'd been doing it for years. 3 with serious burns, 5 with lacerations requiring sutures, 2 with possible internal injuries, 1 with a compound fracture, and the unconscious man with head trauma who was breathing but unresponsive. "Where's your mother?" Samuel asked while checking the head trauma patient's pupils. "Haven't found her yet," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Security says some people are still unaccounted for." Samuel nodded, focused on the patient in front of him. Dilated pupils, slow, irregular breathing. Classic. Signs of increased intracranial pressure. Without immediate intervention, this man would die, and Samuel was the only doctor within 50 miles. "Emma, I need you to be my nurse," he said. "Can you handle that? Tell me what to do." Over the next 4 hours, Dr. Samuel Brennan practiced emergency medicine in a gas plant parking lot with nothing but a 23-year-old medical bag and the help of a 16-year-old girl who had her grandfather's courage and her mother's heart. He sutured lacerations by headlight, set a compound fracture using a board from a broken pallet, managed burns with supplies scrounged from first aid kits, and somehow, through skill and prayer and sheer determination, kept everyone alive until the ambulances finally arrived. The head trauma patient stabilized. The burn victims were prepped for transport. The man with internal injuries was conscious and talking. As the last ambulance pulled away, Emma collapsed onto a concrete barrier, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Dr. Brennan," she said, "have I told you lately that you're a miracle?" Samuel was about to respond when a voice cut through the pre-dawn air like a blade. Samuel Brennan. He turned to see a woman in a state police uniform walking toward him. Badge number 847. Detective Linda Morrison, if he remembered correctly. Used to be Linda Patterson, went to high school with Martha. "Linda," Samuel said. "Long time." Not long enough, apparently. Her voice was ice-cold professional. "We need to talk." Emma stepped closer to Samuel, instinctively protective. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Detective," Linda corrected. "And yes, there's a problem, a big one." She pulled out a notepad, flipped it open. "Dr. Samuel Brennan, as of this moment, you're under investigation for practicing medicine without a license. Multiple witnesses have reported that you've been treating patients, prescribing medications, and performing procedures without proper authorization." The words hit Samuel like physical blows. Around them, plant workers who had been thanking him moments before now stared with confusion and growing suspicion. "Detective Morrison," Emma stepped forward, her voice fierce. "This man just saved 23 lives. Without him, we would have waited for properly licensed medical professionals to arrive." Linda's voice could have frozen fire. Dr. Brennan's medical license was revoked in 2003 following a malpractice incident that resulted in patient death. He has no legal authority to practice medicine in the state of West Virginia. The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel felt the familiar weight of shame settling on his shoulders. 23 years of hiding, and it all came crashing down in a gas plant parking lot at dawn. "Linda," he said quietly, "these people needed help. These people needed a real doctor. Not someone playing doctor because he's bored with retirement." "Playing doctor?" Emma's voice cracked like a whip. "Lady, you have no idea what you're talking about. This man..." "Emma." Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. Detective Morrison continued, reading from her notepad. "You're being charged with practicing medicine without a license, illegal distribution of controlled substances, and reckless endangerment. You'll need to come with me for questioning." As she spoke, more police cars arrived. The plant parking lot, which had been a scene of healing and hope, transformed into something that felt like a crucifixion. Samuel looked at Emma, whose face showed a mixture of rage and heartbreak that reminded him painfully of Martha. "What about my mom?" Emma asked. "They still haven't found her." And Linda Morrison's face softened slightly. "The search and rescue teams are still working. No news yet." Samuel made a decision that would define everything that came next. "Detective Morrison," he said, "I'll come with you willingly. Answer any questions you have. But first, I need to know that Emma gets home safely. And I need to know the moment you hear anything about Sarah Walsh." "You're not in a position to make demands, Dr. Brennan." "I'm not making demands," Samuel said. "I'm making requests, from one human being to another." Something in his voice, the quiet dignity, the complete absence of self-pity, seemed to reach her. "Fine," she said, "but we leave now." As Samuel walked toward the police car, Emma called out to him, "Dr. Brennan, this isn't over. You saved all these people. That has to count for something." Samuel turned back, and for a moment, everyone in that parking lot saw him as he really was. Not a criminal or a fraud, but a man who had dedicated his life to healing others, even when it cost him everything. "Emma," he said, "sometimes doing the right thing comes with a price. Sometimes the price is worth paying." The police car door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. As they drove away from the plant, Detective Morrison glanced at Samuel in the rearview mirror. "You know this is serious, right?" she said. "The state medical board has been looking for an excuse to make an example of someone, practicing without a license, especially with controlled substances involved. You could be looking at years in prison." Samuel nodded. "I understand." "Do you? Because I don't think you realize what you've done to yourself. All those people you helped tonight, when they find out you weren't licensed, when they realize they were treated by someone the state considers unqualified, some of them are going to sue. Your good intentions just became a liability nightmare." Samuel stared out the window at the mountains he'd loved his entire life. Mountains that had witnessed his birth, his training, his marriage, his wife's death, and now his professional destruction. "Detective Morrison," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Depends what it is." "If your husband was lying in that parking lot with a head injury, bleeding internally, dying while you waited for help that might never come, would you want me to walk away because I didn't have the right piece of paper in my wallet?" Linda's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't answer, because they both knew what the answer was. The holding cell at the Millbrook police station smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Samuel sat on the narrow bench, staring at his hands. The same hands that had delivered Emma Walsh 16 years ago. The same hands that had tried to save Earl Walsh in the mine collapse. The same hands that had held Martha as she died. Hands that had spent 23 years hiding from their purpose. The same irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent more than 2 decades running from medicine, terrified of making another mistake. And now that he'd finally found the courage to heal again, the law was going to make sure he never practiced medicine again. "Dr. Brennan?" He looked up to see Officer Jenkins, a young man who couldn't be more than 25. Local boy, probably grew up hearing stories about the doctor who'd lost his way. "You've got visitors," Jenkins said. "More than we can fit in the visiting room, actually." Samuel frowned. "I don't understand." "Neither do I, Doc, but you better come see this." Jenkins led him down the hallway to the station's front entrance. Through the glass doors, Samuel could see what looked like half of Millbrook gathered on the front steps. Mike Walsh stood at the front of the crowd, still in his work clothes from the diner. Behind him were faces Samuel recognized. The Burns family from the gas station, the Hendersons who ran the hardware store, the Johnsons who'd lost their son in Iraq 5 years ago, and Emma, standing right beside her father, holding a sign that read, "Dr. Brennan saved my mom's life." "What are they doing here?" Samuel asked. "Protesting," Jenkins said. "Been here for 2 hours, saying they won't leave until you're released." Samuel's chest tightened. These people, his people, the community he'd abandoned for 23 years, had come to stand with him when he needed them most. "Dr. Brennan," another voice. Samuel turned to see Detective Morrison approaching with a manila folder in her hand. "We need to talk," she said. They sat in an interview room that felt like every interrogation scene from every cop show ever made. Morrison opened the folder and spread out papers that looked like they could end Samuel's life as he knew it. "Here's where we stand," she said. "Practicing medicine without a license is a felony. Class B, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The controlled substances charges could add another 5 years. The reckless endangerment charges are wild cards. Depends on whether any of your patients suffer complications." Samuel listened without emotion. He'd known this moment would come. Eventually, part of him was almost relieved. "Thanks for spending time with us today," Morrison continued. "If this story meant something to you, there are some complicating factors. This is still standing souls." She pulled out another set of papers. "Quiet strength. I've been making calls. Lasting hope. Checking your background. Turns out your medical license wasn't exactly revoked in 2003. Samuel's head snapped. "What?" "It was suspended pending investigation of a malpractice claim. The investigation was never completed because the plaintiff died in a car accident before depositions could be taken. The case was dismissed, but your license remained in administrative limbo." The words hit Samuel like lightning. "Are you saying..." "I'm saying that according to the West Virginia State Medical Board, Dr. Samuel Brennan is still technically a licensed physician. Inactive status, but licensed." Samuel felt the world tilt on its axis. "That's impossible. I was told..." "You were told wrong. Or maybe you heard what you needed to hear to justify hiding from the world." Morrison's voice softened slightly. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Before Samuel could answer, Officer Jenkins burst into the room. "Detective Morrison, you need to come outside now." "What's wrong?" "It's about Sarah Walsh. They found her." Sarah Walsh was alive. Trapped in a storage room when the explosion hit, knocked unconscious by falling debris, but alive. Rescue workers had pulled her from the wreckage 2 hours ago. She was at Charleston General Hospital with a concussion and some burns, but she was going to make it. Emma cried when she got the news. Big, ugly, grateful tears that washed away 24 hours of fear. The crowd on the police station steps cheered when Detective Morrison announced that all charges against Dr. Brennan were being dropped. Not because of public pressure, but because of a technicality that felt like divine intervention. Samuel walked out of the police station at sunset, squinting against light that seemed brighter than he remembered. The crowd surrounded him, voices overlapping in gratitude and relief. "Dr. Brennan, thank you for saving my brother. Doc, you remember when you delivered my youngest? Samuel, we never forgot what you meant to this town." Emma pushed through the crowd and hugged him fiercely. "I told you this wasn't over," she said. "Emma," Samuel said, "how did you organize all this?" "I didn't. Word just spread. People remembered who you were before you forgot." Mike Walsh stepped forward, his face serious. "Dr. Brennan, we need to talk. The town council's been meeting all day. We've got a proposition for you." The proposition was simple and impossible at the same time. Millbrook wanted Samuel to be their doctor again, officially this time. The town council had voted unanimously to fund a community health clinic. Nothing fancy, just a small building, on Main Street, basic equipment, and a salary that would keep the lights on. "We can't compete with Charleston salaries," Mayor Patterson explained as they sat in the diner after the police station drama. "But we can offer you something they can't." "What's that? A chance to come home." Samuel looked around the table. Emma and Mike Walsh, Mayor Patterson, Pastor Williams from the Baptist Church, Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store. People he'd known his entire life offering him a second chance he wasn't sure he deserved. "Haven't practiced real medicine in 23 years, he said. "I'm rusty, out of date, you'd be taking a huge risk." "Dr. Brennan," Pastor Williams spoke up, "sometimes God puts us exactly where we need to be, exactly when we need to be there. Tonight wasn't an accident. You being there, having the skills to help, finding the courage to act, that wasn't coincidence." Samuel felt tears threatening for the first time since Martha's funeral. "I made mistakes before, big ones. People got hurt because I wasn't good enough." People get hurt, period, Mayor Patterson said. That's life. The question is, are you going to let fear of making mistakes keep you from doing good? Emma leaned forward, her eyes intense. Dr. Brennan, you saved my mom's life twice. Once in your living room, once tonight in that parking lot. You saved 23 people at the plant. You've been saving people your whole life, even when you were too scared to admit it. She was right, and Samuel knew it. For 23 years, he'd been so focused on his failures that he'd forgotten his successes. Earl Walsh had died, but not before Samuel had given him time to say goodbye to his family. Martha had died, but she'd lived 2 years longer than any other doctor had predicted because Samuel had fought for every day. Medicine wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, being present, fighting for people even when the fight seemed hopeless. When would you need an answer? Samuel asked. Now, Mike Walsh said. Sarah's going to need follow-up care when she comes home from Charleston. The plant accident injured 23 people who will need ongoing treatment. Dr. Park left us high and dry, and the next nearest doctor is 2 hours away. Samuel closed his eyes and heard Martha's voice one more time. Some things are more important than being safe, Sam. Some things are worth the risk of your heart breaking all over again. When he opened his eyes, everyone at the table was watching him with the kind of hope that could either lift him up or crush him completely. Okay, he said. Let's do this. The cheer that went up from the table was loud enough to wake the dead, or maybe just loud enough to wake a doctor who'd been sleeping for 23 years. 6 months later, Dr. Samuel Brennan sat in his new office on Main Street, reviewing patient files and drinking coffee that actually stayed hot. The Millbrook Community Health Clinic wasn't much to look at from the outside. Former hardware store that had been empty for 3 years, converted with donated labor and equipment that was functional, if not fancy. But it was home in a way Samuel hadn't felt since Martha died. The bell above the door chimed, and Emma Walsh walked in carrying a box of medical supplies from Charleston. Last delivery, she announced, setting the box on the reception desk. Dr. Matthews said to tell you that the cardiac monitoring equipment will be here next week. Emma had become his unofficial assistant, working part-time after school and on weekends. College-bound in the fall, pre-med track at West Virginia University. But for now, she was learning medicine the way doctors used to learn. By watching, by doing, by caring about people more than procedures. How's your mother? Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah Walsh was one of his success stories. Medication compliance, dietary changes, regular exercise, and a work schedule that didn't include 16-hour days. Her heart function had improved dramatically. Good, really good. Emma's smile could have powered the whole clinic. She's actually talking about dating again. First time since Dad died. That's wonderful news. Yeah, well, don't tell her I told you. She'd die of embarrassment. Emma paused. Dr. Brennan, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Coming back to medicine? All the stress and responsibility and people depending on you? Samuel considered the question seriously. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. Long hours, difficult cases, the constant weight of other people's lives in his hands, plus the administrative headaches of running a small clinic, the insurance battles, the never-ending shortage of resources. But then he thought about Sarah Walsh's improved heart function, about Tommy Morrison's broken arm that had healed perfectly, about the baby he'd delivered last month, his first delivery in 24 years, healthy and loud and absolutely perfect. Emma, he said, there's a difference between regret and difficulty. This work is difficult. It's supposed to be difficult. Anything worth doing usually is. But the mistakes are part of the job, part of being human. Samuel leaned back in his chair. I spent 23 years trying to avoid making mistakes by not doing anything that mattered. Know what I discovered? That's the biggest mistake of all. The bell chimed again and Sarah Walsh walked in, looking healthier than she had in years. Color in her cheeks, spring in her step, the kind of vitality that comes from not carrying the World alone anymore. Afternoon, Dr. Brennan, she said. Ready for my checkup? Always ready for good news, Samuel replied, gesturing toward the examination room. 20 minutes later, he had more good news to deliver. Blood pressure normal, heart rhythm steady and strong, EKG showing significant improvement from 6 months. Go, Sarah, I think we can cut your visits to once a month, he said. You're doing everything right. Dr. Brennan, Sarah said, I owe you my life, literally. If you hadn't been there that night. You don't owe me anything, Samuel interrupted. We take care of each other here. That's how communities work. Still, Sarah insisted, I want you to know that what you did, coming back to medicine, opening this clinic, it meant everything to people like me. People who couldn't afford fancy doctors in Charleston but needed someone who cared. After Sarah left, Samuel sat alone in his office thinking about the conversation, about caring, about community, about the difference between surviving and living. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Charleston General Hospital. Dr. Brennan, this is Dr. Martinez in the ER. We've got a situation here that we think you should know about. Samuel's blood chilled. What kind of situation? Multi-car accident on Route 9. 7 casualties. We're overwhelmed, and we've got families asking specifically for you. Apparently, several of the victims are from Millbrook, and they trust you more than they trust us. Samuel closed his eyes. Route 9. The same stretch of road where he'd lost his confidence 24 years ago, where he'd made the mistake that had sent him into exile. Dr. Brennan, are you there? I'm here, Samuel said. How can I help? We need you to come in. Consult on the cases. These people know you, trust you. Sometimes that makes all the difference in recovery. Samuel looked around his small clinic, at the examination table where he'd treated hundreds of patients over the past 6 months, at the wall where Emma had hung his medical school diploma, the one he'd kept in a box for 23 years, at the photo of Martha on his desk, smiling the way she'd smiled when she was proud of him. I'll be right there, he said. The drive to Charleston took 45 minutes that felt like 45 years. Samuel hadn't been inside a hospital since Martha's death, hadn't walked the halls where life and death decisions happened every minute of every day, hadn't breathed the particular air of controlled chaos that defined emergency medicine. But as he pushed through the doors of Charleston General's ER, memory kicked in. The sounds, the smells, the electricity of a place where miracles and tragedies happened side by side. It all felt like coming home to a house he'd forgotten he'd ever lived in. Dr. Brennan? A young woman in scrubs approached him. I'm Dr. Martinez, thank you for coming. She led him through the ER, past trauma bays where other people's stories were unfolding in real time. At Trauma Bay 3, Samuel stopped cold. Earl Walsh Jr. lay on the gurney, unconscious, with injuries that looked eerily similar to his grandfather's 26 years ago. Emma's cousin, Dr. Martinez explained. 22 years old, works at the mine like his grandfather did. Internal injuries, possible spleen laceration. Family's been asking for you specifically. Samuel approached the bed, his hands steady, as he examined the young man who had his grandfather's face and his father's stubborn chin. The irony wasn't lost on him. Another Walsh, another emergency, another chance to prove that sometimes second chances were really third chances in disguise. What's the treatment plan? Samuel asked. Surgery to repair the spleen laceration, but he's been asking for you. Won't let us operate until he talks to you. Earl Jr.'s eyes fluttered open as Samuel approached. Dr. Brennan? I'm here, Earl. My grandpa. He used to tell stories about you. Said you were the best doctor in 3 counties. Said you saved his life once, gave him time to meet Emma before he died. Samuel's chest tightened. Your grandfather was a good man. He also said. Earl Jr. winced as pain shot through his abdomen. He said you blamed yourself for his death. Said that was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard, because you gave him the greatest gift anyone could give. Time to say goodbye. The words hit Samuel like lightning. All these years carrying the weight of Earl Sr.'s death, and his grandson, was telling him that Earl himself had never blamed him. Earl, you need surgery, Samuel said gently. Dr. Martinez is an excellent surgeon. She's going to take good care of you. Will you be there? In the OR? Samuel looked at Dr. Martinez, who nodded. If that's what you want, that's what I want. The surgery took 3 hours. Samuel stood in the OR, not as the primary surgeon, but as the steady presence that made a scared young man feel safe. He held Earl Jr.'s hand as the anesthesia took effect. Monitored vitals during the procedure. Was there when Earl woke up, groggy but alive. Dr. Brennan. Earl Jr.'s voice was weak but clear. Did everything go okay? Everything went perfectly, Samuel said. You're going to be fine. Grandpa would be proud of you, you know. Coming back to medicine, taking care of people again. Samuel felt tears threatening. I think he'd be proud of you too. You've got his courage. As Earl Jr. drifted back to sleep, Dr. Martinez pulled Samuel aside. Dr. Brennan, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really stop practicing? The official records are vague, but there are stories. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching Earl Jr. sleep peacefully. Finally, he spoke. I made a mistake once. A patient died, and I blamed myself. Spent 23 years punishing myself for being human. He turned to look at Dr. Martinez. Don't make the same mistake I did. Medicine is about showing up even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. Any other advice? Samuel smiled. Remember that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about being present while someone heals themselves. The drive back to Millbrook was different from the drive to Charleston. Lighter somehow. Like he'd left something heavy at the hospital and picked up something precious instead. Samuel's phone rang as he pulled into town. Emma's number. Dr. Brennan, I heard about Earl. Is he okay? He's going to be fine. Surgery went perfectly. Thank God. Emma's relief was palpable. Dr. Brennan, there's something I need to tell you. I've been thinking about it for months, but tonight seemed like the right time. What is it? I've decided to specialize in cardiology. Like you did. I want to help people like my mom, people who might not get the care they need otherwise. Samuel pulled over, too moved to keep driving safely. Emma, that's wonderful. Your mother must be so proud. She is. But Dr. Brennan, I also want to come back to Millbrook after residency. Work with you at the clinic, if you'll have me. Samuel closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the gift he was being offered. A legacy. A way to make sure the healing continued long after he was gone. Emma, he said, there's nothing I'd like more. After hanging up, Samuel sat in his truck for a few minutes, looking at the lights of Millbrook twinkling against the mountains. His hometown, the place that had made him, broken him, and ultimately healed him. He thought about Martha, about what she would say if she could see him now. Back in medicine, back in the community, back in the business of caring about people more than protecting himself. He thought about Earl Walsh Sr., about the weight of guilt he'd carried for 26 years, and about the grandson who just absolved him of a sin he'd never actually committed. He thought about Emma, growing into the kind of doctor he'd once been, the kind of doctor he was becoming again, and he thought about the future, about the clinic on Main Street that would serve this community for decades to come, about the lives that would be saved, the hearts that would be healed, the miracles that would happen in examination rooms that used to sell hardware. Samuel Brennan had spent 23 years running from his calling. Tonight, finally, he was running toward it instead. 5 years later, Dr. Emma Walsh graduated from medical school on a Saturday in May, with the entire town of Millbrook in attendance. Samuel sat in the front row, wearing the same suit he'd worn to her high school graduation. Sarah sat beside him, healthy and radiant, holding hands with Frank Morrison. Yes, Detective Morrison's brother, the one who'd finally convinced her that life was too short to spend alone. After the ceremony, Emma found Samuel in the crowd. Dr. Brennan, she said, I have something for you. She handed him a small wrapped box. Inside was a stethoscope, Littman Cardiology 4, engraved with the words, for healing hearts, past, present, and future. Emma, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is too much." "No," she said, "it's not enough, but it's a start." She hugged him then, and Samuel realized that this was what legacy really meant. Not avoiding mistakes or protecting yourself from pain, but passing on the best of what you'd learned to someone who would carry it forward. "Ready to change the world, Dr. Walsh?" he asked. "Ready to save it, one patient at a time," she replied. And in the mountains of West Virginia, in a small town where everyone knew everyone and people still took care of each other, two doctors prepared to do exactly that, together. Some callings are stronger than fear. Some healings go deeper than medicine. And sometimes the very thing we run from is the thing that saves us in the end. Thanks for spending time with us today. If this story meant something to you, pass it on. This is Still Standing Souls, real stories, quiet strength, lasting hope.